one of the things that Project 2025 talks about is how we're going to come out of the gates with this, bring the big dictator energy and issue all these executive orders.
BD has a whole new
Yes,
meaning to it.
There you go.
Hello, team, and welcome to Bureaucracy. I'm your host, Emily Gross, and I'm very excited today because I have James Goodwin with me, who's the policy director at the Center for Progressive Reform, and we're going to be talking all about Trump's executive orders and his, him just busting in on day one. James, thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, before we get into this, I think this might be the most important part of this episode is what beer are we drinking?
We're going local here in Philadelphia. So we have Broad Street English Porter.
Ooh, yum.
Pours very nice.
Have a Bronx Brewery World Gone Hazy IPA. Once again,
there you go.
Feels right for everything going on.
Yes.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
I generally don't finish a beer during an episode. I feel like this might be one where I really do.
Well, given today's subject matter, we'll be lucky if we can get through half of this.
Literally. Okay. The question I always love to ask my guests, why should we trust what you have to say?
Well, first of all, I actually am one of the few people who actually bothered reading these damn things last night instead of watching the big college football game. And I'm from Ohio, right?
Oh, wow.
That was a big deal.
What a sacrifice.
For me to forego that. But my background is in administrative law, right? Which is the segment of law that these executive orders deal with. So I have formal training in this stuff. I've been thinking about the executive branch, executive orders. The very first project I ever did, these many years ago when I started at the center, was a project on executive orders. So it's just something I've been studying a long time. So for whatever that's worth to your audience,
It's more than any of the studying I've done on them. So very happy to have you. Initial thoughts, I believe he signed, I'm going to go to my source over here. He signed, I think, 26 on day one, which is the record for executive orders signed on day one since 1937. So, initial thoughts.
So the thing about executive orders you have to keep in mind is presidents don't really have independent lawmaking authority. So executive orders really can't do much of anything except for signal priorities, order around executive branch officials. So when you actually get down into the details of like the substance, they're really quite boring and drab. Even these ones, right? It's all this like, oh, the America's on fire, whatever, emergency. And then you get to the actual guts of the executive order. And it's like, and therefore I order these people to do a report. It's just like, what? But that is executive orders in a nutshell. For you really can't do a whole lot of substance with them.
Yeah. The
one executive order that has any sort of substantive umph to it is the one ending birthright citizenship, which I regret to tell everyone is unconstitutional. So that's sort of the trade-off. Either you can do shit and it's illegal, or you can do nothing and it's just really boring. And that's executive orders. That's sort of the continuum you're on. The more substantive they get, the more likely they're illegal. So my initial impressions, a couple of years ago, I first started really focusing on this thing called Project 2025. And I imagine some of your audience has heard about this, right? And one of the things that Project 2025 talks about is how we're going to come out of the gates with this, bring the big dictator energy and issue all these executive orders.
BD has a whole new meaning to it.
There you go. I swear I told my wife I wouldn't do that, but I did it anyway. Sorry.
I love it. It's perfect.
And so the whole point was, among the many things Project 2025 argued for, was to come out guns blazing with all these executive orders and memoranda. And, lo and behold, that's exactly what he did. So there's that kind of form component to it. It's very Project 2025 in terms of form. In content, of course, it's also very Project 2025. There's a lot in there about asserting executive power, consolidating power in the executive branch, declaring national emergencies, making everything sound like a national security issue. All these things are just very authoritarian sounding, right? And this is exactly what Project 2025 was meant to do. It was create what is in essence an authoritarian vision of a presidency. And so in substance, like these executive orders very much align with like the authoritarian vision that Project 2025 outlines.
Awesome.
How's that for an answer?
It's a great answer. I hate the context. I hate the substance of the answer, but it's a great answer. Very depressing. No. So yeah, for like you were saying, executive orders, they can't create new law. They can only tell basically the departments how to enact the law. So a lot of these executive orders, especially birthright citizenship one, does not really do that. And that one is basically trying to get rid of the 14th Amendment in the Constitution, of which, that being said, it's already faced legal pushback. And I think 18 attorney generals have already filed a suit alleging it's unconstitutional, of which it is. Which a lot of these, and I did see some people that were saying like, they're really written pretty terribly, like you're saying. Yeah. And I believe, and this has been like a conservative method for a very long time, and I'm like 100% sure this is part of it. They're designed to make their way through the court system, right? Trump has packed the Supreme Court, all 9 of him, designed to make this way through the court system, right? And that's what's going to happen. But let's kind of dive into some of the fun parts about the 26 executive orders that went through. Yeah, I know. All right, stretching. Okay.
Do my pre-interview calisthenics. Here we go.
Right. Okay. All right. I'm going to read through all of them. I'm looking at a list right now. Okay. Restoring names that honor American greatness. And that's where Gulf of America comes in. Say goodbye, Gulf of Mexico. Okay. Because that's a priority. Designating cartels and other organizations as foreign terrorist organizations. Reforming the federal hiring process, restoring merit to government service. And then we continue on to ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs, which I think is supposed to end all DEI programs. Defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. That lists everything as there's only two sexes.
Did you read that one?
Yeah, that one's fucking nuts.
We're gonna
let's unpack that one a bit.
We're gonna talk about gender based upon the point of conception, which is like biologically nonsense. Like makes no sense.
So yeah, they're like point of conception, and they're like the large. What was it, like egg or something, sperm? Yeah. And you're like, what? And then I saw someone on post this being like, for the first 6 weeks of conception, technically every embryo is female. Yeah. Uh-oh. So they just accidentally decided that every single person in this entire country is listed as female now. And I'm like, let's go for it. Who cares about science? Science schmience is what they say.
Yeah. Also authoritarian, right? Like if you're, one of the barriers to authoritarian goals is science expertise, right? And that is just an overarching theme across all these orders and memoranda yesterday is just disregard for expertise in science.
Yeah. Scary when people believe what they see on Twitter versus what, fucking who says. All right. Establishing DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, which also faces another lawsuit. Because you know what? Screams government efficiency is creating another department.
So confess my nerdiness. That was the executive order I was most interested in looking at because this is the Elon Musk thing. We're going to create this efficiency body and we're going to cut the budget by 1/3, $2 trillion. We have like a $6 trillion budget. We're going to cut it by 1/3, $2 trillion.
He said $2 trillion, but now he's walking back and saying $1 trillion.
Right. Whatever. And so like the big thing was how are they legally going to do this? Because if it's an advisory committee, then it has to comply with this really boring law called the Federal Advisory Committee Act. And everybody's like, well, how are they going to do that? Well, they did it by just completely bullshitting their way through it. They took this existing agency called the U.S. Digital Services or something, right? This agency that Obama, that small little body that Obama sort of stood up after I think right before or right after the rollout of Obamacare. And the whole point of it was just to help agencies like modernize their computer systems. They're basically like the tech geeks for the executive branch, right? And on nobody's radar screen, I study this shit all the time. I know every agency. I've never heard of these guys, right? And, I'm reading through the executive order and I get to that section of like, we're going to take this agency and we're going to turn them into Doge. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? I talked to all these other administrative law dweebs like myself, and we're all like, we did not see that one coming at all. But yeah. And so the whole point of that is to totally insulate this against FACA, the Federal Advisory Commission Act. It makes it damn near impossible to FOIA these guys. And the one challenge, though, is how do we bring in Elon Musk into this, right? Because it's a government agency. He has to be, if he's going to work for them, he's got to become a government employee, which he doesn't want to do. So they have this special category of government employee called like special executive government something or other, SEGs or something like that.
That sounds like something Elon Musk would love to be.
And it's like this temporary thing. The catch, though, is you have to do these big financial disclosures, which, of course, he's not going to do. Sign these ethics forms, which, of course, he's not going to do. So I don't know. I understand you can get waivers for these things. So, of course, he's going to get waivers. But this is this is sort of what Project 2025 was all about. And what these executive orders are all about is we're going to take this body of arcane law, administrative law, and we're going to find a way to short circuit it so that we can basically do whatever we want to do. And this right here, how we're going to create the actual government agency Doge by taking this husk of this tiny agency that nobody's ever heard of and basically turning it into this other thing that it was never meant to be. Now we all want to do administrative law now, right? All your audience.
Right. We're all just like, oh my God. Well, this is like what happened with Mifepristone and the Comstock Act. They just brought that out of nowhere and everyone's like, oh, yep. It's as much as it pains me to say, people who think that the conservative leaders and movement are dumb are dumb themselves, because they are smart and they know how to find things to get done what they want to get done, and they fight dirty. And this is the result of that.
Unethical, right? I look at administrative law all day long, and I'm thinking of ways to use it to prevent bad things, right? And instead they're like, well, how can we diffuse this so we can do whatever we want? It's just I couldn't imagine just going through life like that, but there they are. Sad.
Yeah, different priorities,
I was brought up different.
My parents would be like, get out if I ever acted like this. They'd be like, take a walk around the block and think about your actions.
Yeah, right.
American First Policy Directive, Secretary of State. Oh, that one probably something important, but not that important. Protecting the United States from foreign terrorists, unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential, which comes into his drill baby drill, which gets rid of any of the foreign protections that the Biden administration had enacted, and allows Alaska to be drilled for oil.
Yeah.
Great. Protecting the American people against invasion, and apparently revokes 4 executive orders signed by Biden. What do you know about that one?
If that's the one where it's, and so this is an example of what I was talking about before. It tries to take all these, one of these overarching trends that you see to these executive orders and memos and stuff from the first day, is it tries to repackage everything as this national security crisis, right? And why does it do that? Why do they do that? So, under our Constitution, the president is like the commander in chief. He's the civilian head of our military. And so he has this sort of inherent military authority, right? And so the more something looks like a military issue, the more power he has. And there's this really nerdy case you encounter in your constitutional law class called Youngstown Sheet and Tube. And it's not even the majority opinion, it's the concurring opinion from Robert Jackson. And everybody reads this thing. And he lays out this elaborate spectrum, right? Where, you know, like when the president is operating without like clear statutory authority, like where does he have the most power? And it's in those instances, like at the end of the spectrum where he's closest to his inherent constitutional powers, that he is most free to like do stuff without like explicit statutory authority. And you know, that's exactly what they're doing, is they're trying to make this all look like national security stuff, like military stuff, so that they can claim like, oh, we, you know, even though we don't have statutory authority for this stuff, it sort of flows from our constitutional duties as like the head of the military. The energy one, the declaring an energy emergency because, you know, like not having enough oil and gas somehow is a national security crisis. I think they even make the argument in the gender executive order that it's a national security thing. It's just like it's so transparent, like what they're trying to do. Shameful, even shameless, both. Shameless and shameful,
both. Yeah, shitty, yeah. Shitty all around. And for
how dare they?
Right, and for the gender executive order, had a great episode couple weeks ago with one of the policy directors from Lambda Legal. Friendly reminder, transgender population makes up 1% of the United States. Okay. So great use of government resources is figuring that out. Yeah. All right, let's go into the next ones. Foreign aid, declaring a national energy emergency, which we just talked about. Oh, this one's fun. Restoring the death penalty.
Yep.
That was great. Making sure that all states have all of the drugs they need to make sure that they can execute people easier. Because humanity...
And that was out of Project 2025 too, right? Not only were they supposed to like maximally apply the death penalty, they were also supposed to find like new crimes to apply it to, right? And it's
fucking nuts.
Yeah.
For a party that really values its relationship to God and Christianity, especially, it's a wild way for them to show that.
Culture of life.
Yeah. Crazy. All right. Another one, securing our borders, protecting the meaning and value of American citizenship. I believe that is the one regarding birthright citizenship.
Yep. What's interesting is this was actually broader than like what a lot of people were expecting, right? So what they were thinking that Trump was going to do was end birthright citizenship for people who were in this country illegally. Full stop. But that's not what this says. What it says is even if you are here legally but don't have like full citizenship, and you know it's weird that it's asymmetric in some ways, like they treat the mother different from the father. And oh god, I wish I had the language for how they define the mother and father. Your audience should look it up. It's just hilarious. They're like the progenitor, the immediate progenitor. You know, it's just like, what? Who talks like that? You know, so this is like a very common circumstance where you have like two people who come to this country from, you know, or like professors in college, right? They're not from this country. And then they have a kid. You know, they're here with papers or whatever, but they're not citizens. That kid would not have birthright citizenship, right? What I understand is that those are the exact circumstances that apply to Kamala Harris. Under the executive order as it is written, she would not be able to claim birthright citizenship. I mean, it applies prospectively, right? So it's only like after the executive order that kicks in, so it wouldn't affect her. But people in her identical situation would not be considered American citizens. It is just an extraordinarily broad in its sweep of how it defines who doesn't get to claim birthright citizenship. I mean, what's so striking about it is like this isn't an issue where the legal answer is like gray or unclear. This is a question that came before the Supreme Court like 100 years ago. The Supreme Court was like, yeah, that's not what the 14th Amendment says. Birthright citizenship, even if your parents aren't citizens, period. The end. Everybody knows this, right? This is in the same constitutional law class I was just telling you about with Robert Jackson. And just, they don't care, right? They just don't care. Like the Constitution doesn't matter. I mean, so the argument, there is no argument. The point is to dare the Supreme Court to either agree with them or not, right?
We see the Supreme Court doesn't really care about precedent.
Yeah, and the thing is, you know, I've had a lot of conversations with people about how this will shake out. And a lot of people are like, there's no way the Supreme Court is going to go along with this. They're going to swat this down. And it's almost like a free pass to them, right? Because they swat this down with, you know, this obviously unconstitutional executive order. And then they get to say, oh, look at how independent we are. And then the New York Times swoops in and writes their, oh, look at this independent streak from the Supreme Court. You know, they're not political hacks, right? So it's this like, it's just this very self-serving scenario that sets up. Like literally conservatives cannot lose, right? The Supreme Court, they either side with Trump and say like, yeah, you know, that earlier precedent was wrong. We agree with them, or they swat it down and they look like heroes. They you know, they've created a win-win situation for them.
It's wild. Listen, everything is so upsetting, but what the Supreme Court has become, I think, is probably one of the greatest losses to American democracy. It's nuts to me. Absolutely nuts to me. Are you kidding? Yeah. Even at Trump's inaugural ball last night, he gave a hug to Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas and was hugging them. And I was like, how is this okay?
It's not. It's not
crazy. It's just been accepted.
Yeah.
Wild. Sorry. It gets me going. It really pisses me off. Any homest. All right. Oh, refugee admissions program, got rid of that for 90 days. And then they're going to decide whether or not to allow refugees in, is basically what I read from that one. Unleashing American energy, gets rid of all of these protections, environmental protections.
Yep.
Revokes 12 executive orders signed by Biden.
Yep. Yeah.
Great.
That's so we had brought up earlier, like how most of these executive orders were like basically crapped out on a cocktail napkin. This is the one that they actually did their homework on. Clearly they had their good lawyers working on this one. It's much more technically sophisticated. They get into some pretty nitty gritty details. You know, it was like the oil industry who basically wrote it. Like, I mean, It was not Trump's folks.
No. Yeah, no, certainly. Rudy Giuliani was not working on it. All right. Clarify military's role in protecting the territorial integrity of the United States. I don't think that one. Oh, does that one I think that allows the military to step in border security.
Oh, yeah. So that one is actually really terrifying.
Cool.
So here's the thing. We in the United States do not deploy our military for domestic purposes. Mm-hmm. And I think the reasons for that are obvious because it's really scary. You look at like foreign dictatorships and that's what they do. They deploy their military for like
Syria.
Yeah. And so we have a very long history in this country of saying, no, that's not cool. We do it there are exceptions, of course. So, for example, when we were trying to integrate like the schools and colleges in the South at the end of Jim Crow, like we had to send down the National Guard to help with that. But it's deployed very, very reluctantly, right? And so what they're trying to do is confuse they're trying to confuse immigration with national security. Those are two conceptually very different things, right? If a foreign army wants to invade the United States, like if Mexico sends its army into the United States, hell yes, send the military to the border. But if it's just a bunch of randos coming across the border, that's not a military invasion. That's not an invasion at all, right? It's a lot of illegal immigrants or whatever, but it's not a military thing. And we have institutions for dealing with that problem. The problem is when you start deploying the military for domestic purposes like this, people start to get desensitized to it, right? And eventually, then it becomes a very short step from doing something like that to then deploying the military against a bunch of Black Lives Matter protesters or people protesting the Trump administration for targeting transgender people or whatever the issue is going to be, right? And that feels like the purpose of this, right, is to make people a little desensitized to the military being used in these ways that we are not accustomed to, but could become accustomed to, right? So like when you and I, so like many years ago here in Philadelphia, we had the Pope visit and we had the National Guard everywhere in our neighborhood. And it was it made you feel sick to your stomach just seeing it, right? Because that's just not the American way. You don't have military people just patrolling neighborhoods, right? So you slowly introduce people to that idea in sort of like oblique ways. And eventually that's just like, oh, okay, that's fine. I don't want to go down that path as a country. I think that's a bad idea. I know that's an unpopular view, but I stick with it.
Yeah. So that's going to be my platform that I run on when I run for president. Okay. Oh, another one revokes holding former government officials accountable because we all know that Trump loves a grudge, and that revokes security clearances of 50 bureaucrats and individuals. Restoring accountability to policy influencing positions within the federal workforce. Doesn't that one make it easier to fire federal workers?
Yeah, that's like the linchpin, right? Because, I mean, here's the thing is everybody complains about, these bureaucrats, they're like, bad for democracy. No, bureaucrats are like the guardians of our democracy. In point of fact, the whole reason things didn't go completely off the rails during the first Trump term was because of the bureaucrats, because of our professional civil service. They had job protections, and when he asked them to do stuff that was illegal or unethical, they could literally say, no, we're not doing that. And so that's the problem. That's the problem this is meant to solve, is he wants people to do everything they're told to do, regardless of its legality, its ethics. These are professionals, like they're lawyers. I'm a lawyer. When I got sworn into the bar, I swore that I would not use my education and training in ways that are like bad for society. That is my professional responsibility, right? So above and beyond what, government lawyers have to do, like swear an oath to the Constitution, they have a professional responsibility not to do bad stuff. So this is meant to get rid of all of that, right? Oh, you want to be a professional. Oh, you want to be ethical. Oh, you want to follow the law. Tough. You're fired, out of here. And that's what that executive order is all about.
Awesome.
About a year ago, the Biden administration issued a regulation that basically blocked implementation of that. And, what's interesting is that Trump, who's historically not really keen on following procedural requirements, in this point, like begrudgingly accepted they had to jump through that procedural hoop. So what does that practically mean? They got to undo this rule. That could take a year or so. It's going to survive. It will get challenged in court, so it'll have to survive a legal challenge, which is not nothing, right? Point of fact, Trump administration, first time around, it was like something like 70% of the rules got struck down in court, even in like Republican judges, right? Which is extraordinary. Usually the loss percentage is closer to like 20 to 30, right? Just because you do your homework, you follow the procedural rules, you actually put up like courts are not going to like dig into your policy arguments because they're like, we're not doing policy here. We just want to make sure you dotted your I's and crossed your T's, really. But they just repeatedly effed it up. They just couldn't be bothered to do it right. And so time and time again, they got their rules struck down. And so that's going to be like one of the big questions going forward. is whether the Trump administration has the discipline to actually follow these procedural rules. And, like I said earlier, like executive orders are actually really boring once you dig into them. Blah, 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 do investigation, blah, 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 write a report, blah, 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 issue a regulation, right? Regulations can take years, 2 years, 3 years. These executive orders are not quickly executing or even like automatically executing. It takes time, and they're not a guaranteed thing. They have to survive court challenge. And, if the first Trump administration is any indication, that's really an area of uncertainty going forward, whether they have the discipline to do this, basically do their homework.
Interesting. Well, with Project 2025, it looks like they're trying to fix that problem.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Last couple. Withdrawing the U.S. from who, which is great. So what could go wrong there? Yeah, awesome. TikTok is the next one, which I've done a lot of research on that one. Another executive order that will likely face legal challenges because the executive order for TikTok says he has 75 days to decide what to do, right? And that the DOJ should not implement the law for 75 days.
Yeah.
However, the original law says it can only be an extension if there is an active sale in place, of which there is not. Yeah. Right. So this is also another one that would probably not hold up in court, and whether or not it's sued will be interesting. I don't know if it has been yet.
Well, and this is like one of those executive orders that you sort of read it and you're like, they're really not talking about this issue. They're really talking about other stuff. So what are they talking about here? One is they want to sort of show the world that, yes, I, President Trump, tell the DOJ what to do. For your audience, that may not sound like much, but the point, historically, the Department of Justice has been very, very insulated against presidential control. And that's because the DOJ is not the president's lawyer. It is America's lawyer, right? And politicized enforcement is a really scary thing to contemplate. So we have put up these huge firewalls between presidents and the Department of Justice since the beginning. So when this executive order starts talking about, I've directed the Department of Justice not to bring enforcement action, like that's kind of skeezy. That's really uncomfortable to even contemplate. Because if they're doing it for this, what else are they going to do that for? And if it's don't do this enforcement action against this person we like, but do this enforcement action that could be bullshit against these other people we don't like this is this sort of scary authoritarian place that we might be headed to. And so, so when I read that the thing is like, I don't know if it does get challenged in court. Who's going to challenge it, right? You have to have standing, right? You have to be injured by this thing. Who is actually injured by the president ignoring this particular law? Maybe a TikTok competitor, but no. So the point of it is, it's one of those things where it's clearly illegal, but also like not easily enforceable, or there's no real easy way to hold Trump accountable for it. But what it does signal is Trump's willingness to sort of politically manipulate how the Department of Justice operates.
Are there any rules? I know there's precedent, right? But it is kind of rather unfathomable to know that a president can be like, don't enforce this law or enforce this law,
Yeah. Well,
it happened with Biden and marijuana, right? I was reading about that. So it's it's very interesting, but it's kind of shocking.
You can sort of do broad priorities, right? But specific enforcement actions against an identifiable company, that is new. That is not something that's been done in the past. And, the way we've dealt with that in the past. So, for example, when, during the first Trump administration, when there was the DOJ investigations of Trump administration officials, we brought in an independent counsel. When Bill Clinton was being investigated for Whitewater, we brought in an independent counsel. So we have ways of sort of dealing with that problem, right? Institutionally, we've been very careful about keeping the Department of Justice just hermetically sealed against the president or presidential influence and interference. And, this executive order is just like, is sort of this signal, like, that's not going to be the way things operate for the
Are there any laws, though, that actually keep the DOJ insulated, or has it just been precedent?
There are laws, but more than that, there are norms. Right?
Well, that's what's concerning, is because norms have been thrown out the window.
Yes. And that is the big problem, is no president ever would have considered. I mean, you would never fire an independent counsel, right? And Trump did that like twice the first time around, right? So like these sorts of norms are not terribly viable with a president with authoritarian inclinations. As bad as things were the first time, and they were bad, they were just going to get so much worse. And this executive order indicates as much.
Yeah. And especially because the initial people he put in charge for the first one had most of them had more loyalty to America and the Constitution. And he's gotten rid of that. And he is
like Pam Bondi. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. He's purely choosing people that have loyalty to him.
Yeah.
Okay. 4 left. This one revoked 67 executive orders signed by Biden. So there goes.
It would have been a lot funnier if it had been 69.
It could have been so good.
Yeah.
God damn it.
And we could all been like, nice.
Yeah.
The thing about executive orders, like I said, is they carry no independent legal authority. They're really just a statement of priorities as a president, sort of directions to folks. I mean, essentially memos, glorified memos in many cases. But it is still heartbreaking to see all these things just get just so easily disposed of, right? I mean, their symbolic value, right, was so important. I mean, we had a president, President Biden standing up for transgender people in an executive order. We had President Biden standing up for environmental justice in ways that had never been done before. We had executive orders talking about reaching out to rural America. We had executive orders focused on making government services easier to access. And, so like if you're applying for like a government loan or applying for a government grant, making all those things easier. And like, some of that stuff is very small and probably doesn't sound terribly inspiring. But when you sort of add it all up, the Biden administration really did set out a really inspiring vision of what government could be with those executive orders. And then, for this clown to just come in and flush that all down the toilet so casually, doesn't make much of a difference legally, but man, the symbolic pain of that is really ouch.
Yeah, it's sucks. I personally, I have a very expressive face, and immediately when I'm thinking at any moment, I could not have been Biden or Harris sitting on that stage listening to Trump's inaugural speech the entire time.
Hell no.
For the most part, they were stoic. There was one moment that I don't think people are talking about, which I think is hilarious, is that when whoever was introducing Trump talked about the peaceful transfer of power, and in that moment, Biden did the sign of the cross. Which people just slightly, that I think got a little bit under the radar, but I'm like, that's hilarious. But I mean, just saying, I believe this includes, the ability for Medicare to negotiate drug prices.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I mean, all these things which common sense do benefit everyone, except the pharmaceutical industry. Right.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
This was one of the most public centered, and I know people have a lot of gripes about the Biden administration. He effed up Gaza, but so much of his domestic policy was so centered on just making lives better for ordinary folks. and I was not a Biden fan going into this. I had just the lowest expectations, and he was far and away the most progressive president we have ever had in my lifetime. And I hate to break it to you, I was born during the Carter administration. I'm that old. It just blew away the Obama administration even.
Yeah.
It was just so much more progressive. And like those executive orders really captured that. There's just no way that Obama was ever going to do or take those kinds of principled stances that he took in those executive orders. But now they're gone.
Sayonara. See you maybe in 4 years.
We hardly knew you.
No, like I was saying with my roommate, like Biden has made a lot of mistakes, right? A lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
I genuinely feel bad for him in the way in that what is happening. He has dedicated his entire life to service and has tried so hard to do so many things, right? And it's all being wiped away. But I don't know.
You know what Biden or Trump can't take away, though, is that is the new baseline for future Democratic presidents, right? Going forward, every Democratic president has to at least consider taking those stances, on transgender rights, on my issue area, regulatory policy, which has never been something that has been like something that Democrats embrace, right? Biden was so much more progressive on this. And, the way I sort of look at it is, Trump came in and flushed all that down the toilet. But this, going forward, this is the expectation for future Democratic presidents. Like, this is the way they have to approach this issue, or they have to at least come up with a damn good reason why not. So, at least we have that. He moved the needle in a way that will be very difficult to undo.
Crossing fingers if we still have a democracy in the next 4 years.
Yeah, right.
That being said, last three. All right. Restoring freedom of speech and ending federal censorship. Stupid, because it's been a massive talking point for Trump's campaign. It's an executive order that just says freedom of speech needs to happen, which it does. Ending of the weaponization of the federal government. And that is the one that pardoned 1,500 January 6th insurrectionists and some that have been accused of violent crimes. So that's fun. And even a lot of Republican congressmen are speaking out about how that was just done in one big sweeping motion. This is like one of the big talking points, and this is one of the huge things that he had promised, and it shows a terrible precedent. But what else is new? And the final one, which is a blast from the past, taking us out of the Paris Agreement and the Paris Accords. So say goodbye to climate change, because it doesn't exist, apparently. So, 20 day of fun.
Yeah, and you just have to kind of wonder what the rest of the world thinks of us.
I think they think we're dum-dums. The kind of perspective that I'm hearing.
Like we all have that like dysfunctional neighbor, right, in our neighborhood. Like that, I feel like that's the way they think of us now.
We are kind of like the gross uncle that you still have to invite to like Thanksgiving. No one wants them there.
And it's depressing because if nothing else, even if, let's say you just, I don't know, don't believe in climate change, but you want to make a crap ton of money. My God, like the clean energy industry is like trillions of dollars, right? What's so fascinating about the whole thing is Republicans just loved grifting people, cheating people, right? Like, so why can't this be like the new grift? Like, oh, look those stupid saps who believe in climate change. Let's sell them a bunch of clean energy shit. Fine. I'll take it.
You're like, please scam me for the greater good.
Yeah, but for some reason, like that's like the one scam that they're like not comfortable taking advantage of.
That's so funny.
Can't explain it.
All right, James, any last final thoughts on the executive order extravaganza?
I mean, there's more to come. we have to keep our eye on the prize here. Executive orders, like I say, they're essentially statements of vision, right? And we know what his vision is. It's crappy. It's authoritarian. And so we on the left have to keep reminding people like the disconnect between that vision and what they feel in their daily lives, right? Pulling out of the Paris Accords is not going to make eggs cheaper, right? Shitting on transgender people is not going to change the fact that you hate your boss. Like all those things about your life that you do not like, Trump is not doing a damn thing to help you. Right. So you got to remind them of that. And you got to remind them what government can be and can do for people. And none of this vision that Trump has embraced is doing that. So that is my sort of pep talk to America.
One of the executive orders talked about grocery prices. So good reminder for people. Right.
Yep.
And so, yeah, seeing the effects of this already, right? We saw CPB1 already taken down and no one's all silent. For I think like the first time, there's no ability to get asylum in the U.S. for this period of time until they figure out what they're deciding is okay or not, So it's definitely, it's going to be, I think, a tough 4 years. And I think it's going to rely a lot on mutual aid and mutual community to keep things going. James, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And
anytime, Emily. This has been fun.
Good.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you. And I'll be back next week with another episode of Bureaucracy.